To anyone that has used Microsoft Office since the late 90s, the name Clippy might sound familiar. Of course, we're talking about everyone's favorite, extremely helpful virtual office assistant that the world just couldn't live without. And yes, I'm joking. Beginning with Office 97, Microsoft implemented something called the Office Assistant, a small virtual guide that was created to make using the Office suite easier by providing useful tips and advice. At least, that's what it was intended to do, but more on that in a bit. The inspiration behind creating Clippy came in part from another unsuccessful product, Microsoft Bob. You see, in Microsoft Bob, which was an add-on graphical interface for Windows, everyday computer programs and concepts took the form of virtual household items. Instead of folders on your computer, Bob had rooms inside of a house. The items contained in this house corresponded to individual computer programs. For example, the text editing application was identified by a pen and envelope, and the calendar program as, well, a calendar. This was intended to make it easier for novice computer users to understand what each particular program did. While Microsoft Bob ended up being a complete failure, Microsoft did reuse one aspect of it, the assistant. In Bob, you had an assistant that would accompany you throughout the entire program. This assistant was on screen at all times and would help the user navigate the Bob house by providing information and tips to the user. Sound familiar? The default one was Rover the dog, who would eventually make a reappearance in Windows XP's search function. Other assistants were bundled as well, but Clippy wasn't one of them. However, it's very clear to see the parallels between Bob and the Office Assistant, as the technology is very similar between the two. Most people remember Clippy by his infamous "it looks like you're writing a letter, would you like help with that" pop-ups. These messages would be displayed by Clippy when the user typed a specific phrase. For example, typing the word "dear" followed by somebody's name at the beginning of a document would trigger a pop-up from Clippy asking if you needed help writing a letter. When presented with this message, the user had two options: get help with writing the letter, or just type the letter without any help. I'm sure that most of them chose the latter. Believe it or not, the idea for Microsoft Clippy actually originated on a Macintosh computer. Kevin Atterbury, who formerly worked on Microsoft Bob, created Clippy on his Mac after Microsoft wanted to bring the virtual office assistant aspect from Bob over to Microsoft Office. Clippy was just one of many Office assistants. Like Bob, the user had the ability to select a different assistant if they wanted to, and Microsoft even created additional assistants that were not bundled with Office and made them available to download online. Said Atterbury, "We designed about 250 characters, and I had about 15 or 20 of them in there. Through working with some social psychologists out of Stanford, we spent 6 months going through them all, whittling them down with focus groups and stuff like that. And Clippy came out to be the number one most trustful and engaging and endearing character of them all, so he became the default." However, due to the unpopularity of Clippy, most Office users never even experimented with these other assistants and just began calling the entire Office Assistant feature Clippy. Eventually, Microsoft slowly killed off the Office Assistant. Beginning with Office XP, Microsoft disabled the assistant by default, but the user could still enable it if need be. By the time Office 2007 came around, or 2008 for the Mac version, Microsoft removed the Office Assistant entirely after just 4 Office releases. The main reason being, it just wasn't that popular. Clippy tried too hard to be helpful, to the point where it became intrusive to the user, which would make them want to just disable the feature entirely. Even though Clippy was considered a failure, the Office Assistant has gained somewhat of a cult following. Countless fan art images have been created that incorporate Clippy in some way, and he has even been referenced and parodied in popular video games, movies, and TV shows. Like this scene from NBC's The Office, where Daryl calls up Microsoft to ask them if Clippy is still a thing. An example of a very large Clippy parody came from an unlikely source, Microsoft. It first happened in 2001 on a promotional website for the upcoming Office XP. Microsoft created a Flash-based video game around Clippy, voiced by Gilbert Gottfried.
Hey, what are you gonna do with that?
In which the user had to hit Clippy with various Office supplies. Microsoft followed up 13 years later on April Fool's Day, when they brought Clippy back in Microsoft Office Online for the entire day. There's even a music video for the Delta Heavy song Ghost that follows Clippy's journey from a forgotten dump with other disregarded 90s software through various old programs until he eventually comes face to face with a Siri knockoff, which he attempts to destroy to reclaim his place as the assistant used on computers and devices. It's clear to see that for a feature that was openly disliked by a majority of computer users, Clippy has definitely found a small niche, and although he is probably long forgotten by most, he lives on through the occasional creation of a piece of fan art by a nostalgic computer user reminiscing about the past. That's all for today's episode. I'd like to thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, definitely be sure to give it a like and get subscribed. And as always, I will see you in the next video.